It is one of the most climactic events in all of biblical history. The Israelites had waited 40 years, but now the time had come. It is a poignant moment as they stride across the riverbed of the Jordan, opened for them by the miraculous power of God. Behind them, they leave the wearying decades of meandering around in a barren wilderness and the tragic memories of countless funerals for an entire generation of people who would not just trust God's promises. Slavery in Egypt and the bare survival of nomadic life are bygone experiences now. A new and welcome chapter opens before them. Before them lay a land richer than their dreams, more fruitful than their hopes, and more beautiful than their imagination. Now it is theirs by God's steadfast promise. Their joy had been magnified by recent events. When they arrived at the Jordan, they found it is flood stage, menacing in its speed and dangerous from what it concealed. The jungle-like grove covered by the rapid current left Israel flat-footed. The river was impassable, its crossing impossible. But God intervened, performing a miracle that paralleled the miracle of the Exodus from Egypt. God rolled back the waters of the Jordan River just as he had done with the Red Sea. God meant he had said through Moses years before. Here was his signature again in the same way, to assure his people that he was good to his word. I imagine there were songs and shouts as God's people worshiped and exulted in him. But there was also one important act that calls for our attention this morning. After Israel crossed, God gave Joshua some very specific instructions recorded in Joshua 4, 1 through 3. After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua. Choose 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe, and command them. Take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priest's feet are standing. Carry them with you and set them down at the place where you spend the night. Joshua did exactly what he was told, sending these select 12 men back to the riverbed of the Jordan, where they were to bring 12 stones. Stones at one point were buried, unreachable, covered by a challenge to the faith of God's people, but were now divinely accessible. 12 men hoisted heavy stones to their shoulders from Jordan's floor and then piled them together in the promised land by God's command. They were stacked there as a sign, an unmistakable marker at the very place where God had demonstrated his power to overcome any obstacle to his will. Because stones don't naturally stack, there would come a day when Israel's children would ask for an explanation for this phenomenon. Here's the answer God wants the next generation to know. Tell them the story, God says in verse 7, of how the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan waters were cut off. Verses 23 and 24 add, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. This is so that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord's hand is mighty, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God. Remembering the stones. Before we get to remembering the stones, a couple announcements I want to make. Very excited. It was just a year ago that my dear friends, the Alangis, Bill and Julia, were baptized, and they're celebrating their one-year baptism, having them in the audience. And then also have become my dear friends Lynn and Maria Earp, studied through the scriptures that we post on our website, and they decided that they became members of the church about a year ago. So great anniversaries to celebrate today. Remembering the stones. Landon? Not those stones. Not those stones. Remembering the stones. In Joshua 3 and 4, we see an amazing story. A story of God's deliverance A story where God intervened and did so much and wanted the generations to remember. Our month of remembering goes on, and we talk about the stones. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to their Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 6 feet, a social distance, no, a distance of 1,000 yards between you and the ark, and do not go near it. Yeah, they social distance back then too. Think about this for a moment. Think about what were the people feeling. They'd been 40 years in the wilderness, wandering aimlessly around. What were they feeling? They were feeling fear, confusion, paranoia, insecurity, faithless, internal conflict and fighting, loneliness. They felt under judgment. What was somebody else thinking about me? Am I being judged? What is God thinking of me? If I mess up, will we go back into 40 years of wandering? They were wrestling with a lot of issues. Uncertainty, feeling fear of being blamed. Was it their fault? Guilt, frustration, depression, anxiety, worry, doubt. What was the future to hold if they crossed this Jordan? What was going to go on? What was tomorrow going to look like? Will there be masks? I hate masks. You know, as we look through these things and we think about what they felt, isn't that what we're feeling? Fear, confusion, paranoia, insecurity, faithlessness, loneliness. Am I being judged? If I get COVID, will they blame me? If I don't get the shot, if I do get the shot, what will they say about me? What's the right thing to do? I feel so guilty. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do. I'm anxious. What happens when we start society again? What will it be like? We feel the same things. We're wandering in the same wilderness that they wandered in those days. Stuck in the wilderness, stuck in the feelings of things. What do we do? They'd been in the wilderness for 40 years. And finally before them was the promised land. They could look out and think, maybe this is finally over. And God had told them to stay still and that the Ark of the Covenant would come right before them. And when the Ark of the Covenant came, to stand up and follow the Ark across the river. Flood stages are a very interesting thing. You're going to hear more about our trip to Colorado last week, but we went through Colorado, and we went through this canyon, and I couldn't tell you how large these mountainous areas were that we drove through. But they towered way up there, more than this building. And Cindy told the story how the floodwaters came through. And how were those made? The floodwaters created that. Growing up in the Midwest and in St. Louis, I remember this flood of St. Louis back in the 80s, seeing 2- and 3-story buildings completely underwater, seeing farmhouses completely destroyed as the floods moved through. These people were looking at flood stages of water. And God said, pick it up. They were to get up and think. I'm afraid that the COVID has put us back into a wilderness, a wandering, aimless confusion in our relationship with God. We don't know how to handle it. We don't know what to do. We're truly confused. I think of a couple named Brent and Melissa. Brent and Melissa, we met Brent at a McDonald's one day. The guys got together. We took the kids to McDonald's. back in the yesteryear's day when they had playgrounds and everything was great. And Brent was over there with his son, and us men were huddled up, and fortunately, eventually, one of us had to get courage to invite Brent to church. Big deal. Brent was very excited. He was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. I really want this. I really need this. I'll bring my wife. And, we're like, nah, they'll never come. But okay. Sure enough, the next Sunday they showed up. They started studying the Bible. They were excited. They were enthusiastic. And they started growing with God. The problem is Brent was a kleptomaniac. He worked at a store called Famous Bar. And when we went over, he'd have piles of shirts. And he would tell us, oh yeah, they're giving those away to employees. And other things happened. But we kept in there. We were studying the Bible with them. They were baptized. We're trying to help them. He ended up being a car salesman, actually a very good car salesman. He rose quickly in a matter of months to being the manager. But at night, he would steal a car and go out drinking. And one day, he wrecked the car. Brent saw the promised land. He could see the answers to his marriage, to his parenting, to his sin. But one night, at 3 a.m. in the morning, we get a knock on the door. I look over at Cindy. Somebody's at the door. She says, yeah. I said, yeah. She would tell the story, which is true, that she got up and answered the door as I hid behind the corner. Brent had been stabbed 12 times in his back with a steak knife from his wife. He laid on her couch, bleeding, and we said, Brent, we got to call an ambulance. He said, no. I said, we got to. He got out, drove. We called the police. They eventually found him in his driveway, passed out in his car, bleeding to death. Took him to the hospital. We continued to try to stay them. Eventually, Brent was put in jail in Texas. His wife followed him there, and we don't know what happened to them. Brent saw the promised land, but he didn't make the steps forward he needed to. Brent and Melissa needed to. I think of another friend, a friend named Phil Velton. Phil was a great guy. He was my height. Love him. Had 3 beautiful daughters, wife. We got in again, studied. They were coming to church. He was baptized. He was excited. He was in that rocky soil, if you will. And we were moving along. A lot of brothers in there helping him, helping his marriage, helping things go. Phil stopped listening. He stopped listening. He stopped listening to the advice we were trying to help him with, to guide him forward. He knew better. He owned his own business. He knew better. Eventually, his business went under. His wife divorced him. And they found him hanging in his office one day. His daughters found him hanging one day. Phil had seen the wilderness. He'd seen the promised land. He started moving that direction and he quit. The wilderness we're wandering in, the confusion, the different things. You're not at that stage. I get it. Those were 2 very good friends of mine. I get it, that you're not there. But let me ask you this. Are you wandering or are you marching? What has the COVID done to you? Are you wandering or are you marching to God's call? Some of us have taken our eyes off the promised land. We've taken our eyes off of God. We have allowed the situation to take control. Does coming to church equal your relationship with God? Absolutely not. I get that. Absolutely not. Coming here to the building does not equal your relationship with God. On the other hand, what are you missing? You're missing joy. You're missing the worship experience. You're missing encouragement. You're missing faith. You're missing passion. And look, I get it, and I've heard a couple stories. I understand it is not prudent for everybody to be here. Some of you absolutely should not be making the effort to be here. It would not be the right thing. I want you to understand, I get that. And I respect that. But like Byron shared, I think there's other of us that, look, it's Sunday morning. It would just be a lot easier just to go put it on stream. In fact, I can do it later that day. That it's not a matter that is it prudent or not for you to be here. It's just easier. And maybe that's the right thing, but I just have a question for you to analyze. I'm not trying to put you on one way or another. How does God feel about your effort to worship Him? For me, only me, but I know if I were to stay home, it's all due to my lack of initiation with God. My effort. God would just know He's just not making the effort to worship me as I want Him to be. The COVID has created a wilderness. Are you wandering or are you marching? The slide that says following the ark across the river. So Joshua 3:14 through 17. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. So I get a kick out of this because I'm going to want to be the priests in the back of the ark, not the guys in the front. If you can see the picture, because I'm waiting to see, okay, where does the flood start to separate? When they just touch the water? Or at ankle deep? Or at waist deep? So if Doug's on the front and I'm on the back and it gets up to about Doug's waist, I'm getting concerned a little bit. So I want to be in the back. But they're starting to cross, and then they walk out there, and you can picture the waters just opening up. The walls just piled. I think I read that it was about a 30-mile stretch that was wide open. And you had some people that just took off and ran. And you had other people walking across. But did you have some people that were a bit hesitant? That as they got going, they looked to the right, the wall of water. They looked to the left. And they got a couple steps out there. Are those walls going to collapse? And maybe those running forward had to reach back and say, come on, let me help you. That little bit of encouragement to go forward. And maybe that person had to reach back and grab somebody else. And maybe there's somebody that wasn't, I'm not going, I'm not crossing, those walls were too big. And they had to reach back. Isn't that discipleship? One person helping another person, helping another person, helping another person. And we've got people just darting right now, taking off, running, Fenton full blast, Lamar taking off. We've got others of us that, I'm coming. And we got others of us that are reaching out but need somebody to grasp and hold. But the key was they had to step forward. They've got to take steps. They got to move forward to take a step. A year ago, think back, maybe February-ish time. And think back today. Is there something in your faith today that you could do that you wouldn't have been willing to do a year ago? What is it today? I don't know where your faith's at. Maybe you've always been afraid to be an usher, but you're willing now. Maybe you've been afraid to teach in children's ministry, but I can do it now. Maybe ushering's too big a deal, but I can fill communion cups. Maybe filling communion cups is too big. Maybe you'd be willing to put out the cups. Something that pushes you a little forward in your faith with God. I don't know what that is. I'm not ready to invite people to church, but I'm ready to be in a Bible study. What is it that you could do today that would be an advancement on where you were a year ago? So we're going to take a moment and talk about my trip to Colorado. Last week as we worshiped, and Carly was singing her song, Holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty, who was, and is to come. We were sitting on a chair looking out on the mountaintops. Below was a lake. Holy, holy, I just look at these mountaintops, seeing this pond. It was amazing. It was incredible. And on this trip, we took a drive, and this is the time to throw Cindy under the bus. We have to have that moment. We're driving back in the dark. Doug's driving. Doug does all the driving. It's windy, and it's very windy. Mountains on both sides, climbing up, super dark. And Kay Neiman goes, Jim, do you have any ghost stories? So we start talking about Twilight Zone and the episode when the hitchhiker's out there in the dark like this, just waiting to be picked up. And we talk about Psycho and the woman driving in the rain. And I say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Cindy says, stop it! Kay reaches up and touches her, and she goes, ah! But where we were coming from, two of the most incredible things that have ever happened in my whole life. We were coming back from Indian hot springs. I remember my dad doing it, so I guess I'm old enough now to go to the hot springs. And what they were, they're caves. And they separate the men and the women, and you go down in this cave, and the water's 110 degrees hot. Yeah. And you got these little, they're the size of bathtubs, but they're pockets in this mountain, or in this cave. And you go sit in, and some are hotter than the others. And Doug and I go in, and we're sitting there, and we're testing out the waters, and we sit there for 10, 15 minutes. And I get out. It's 110 degrees in the cave with 120 degrees humidity. It's warm. And Doug's a little slow in getting in. I'm a little bit faster, not a lot. But he finally gets in, soaks, and we're sitting there. Finally, I'm going to go take a break, and I go out to where it's a little cooler, and he stays in there. Well, I'm out where it's a little cooler for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I think, oh my goodness, Doug's passed out. He doesn't come out. Doug's passed out. So I go in to see what's going on. No lie. In a cave, sitting on a cave ridge, where you would sit in the cave, Doug is sitting there, and there are 3 Ethiopians sitting around him. And Doug is saying, well, we believe Easter is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who died, and he's going through the cross with these guys, and these guys are on the edge of their seats going, really? Really? I think this is the most incredible thing I've seen. And Doug's he forgets all about the heat. He's just sharing his faith in his cave. It's like, wow, how cool is that? I actually just kind of step back and go sit someplace else and watch him do this. He's got it handled. He doesn't need my interruption. And he's just sharing his faith about the cross in a cave in 110 degree water and 120 degree humidity. It was so powerful. Is there something you could be doing today that maybe a year ago your faith wasn't ready for? About a month ago, Fenton asked Cindy and I to lead a topic with the staff, maturing adult disciples. How do mature adult disciples disciple others is kind of the concept. And we're going through a book, and the book had some good things. But one night, and by the way, God never works on me. The Holy Spirit never moves me until 3 a.m. in the morning. So you can pray that he'd find a different time. But 3 a.m. in the morning, I wake up, And, there's this whole list of do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And I went, no, that ain't right. How did Jesus mature his disciples? And John 13 was what blew up in my mind. So we had the whole staff over to our house, not telling them anything we're about to do. We said we got this covered. And Cindy and I got out buckets of water. And those poor people had to increase their faith and had to take off their shoes and socks as we washed their feet. And there was crying, and there was inspiration, and there was movement, there was humility, there was bond and closeness, probably like I'd never seen before. Those people were so humble and gracious and kind at the time to be moved. Is there something today that you could be doing for God that maybe a year ago you weren't ready to do as you step out in the wilderness? I think of a woman named Ann Gregory. Ann's my sister. I'd become a Christian. She came home on college break. I came home on college break. And I was excited in my faith. So knowing how open she was, and look at Acts 2:38, you've not been baptized, you're going to hell. That's all I knew how to do. She says, I am not. You are too. I'm not. She marched down to the Methodist church, to the minister, opened up her Bible and said, look here, why don't we teach this? And he went, later on, Ann was the first baptism of the infamous Boston Church of Christ when it started. She saw the wilderness, but she ran to the promised land. Another story of a guy named John Roberts. John's a good friend of mine in St. Louis. John was one of the first baptisms when Cindy and I, though we had nothing to do with it, in St. Louis back in '87. Ron and Kim will remember John Roberts. John Roberts is one of the most lovable, humble, down-to-earth guys. He's a blue-collar worker. He ran maintenance at Monsanto. Could fix anything. Lovable spirit. Loved being around him. Generous, kind. And he married a young woman, a church, at one time a church intern named Laura Roberts. Couldn't remember her last name, so we'll go by Roberts. Hart. Laura Hart. Problem was John had an addiction. He had a crack cocaine addiction that snuck back up onto him. To the point he would tell stories of after they were married, after he'd been a Christian for years, he would go out, tear his car apart, take his seats out of his car to find one little rock. Laura went on a 2-month, 6-month, 1 year, 2-year fast. Not water and food, but a serious fast. And she was not going to give up that fast till John overcame his addiction. John is one of the pillar members, John and Laura, at the St. Louis church. Awesome, awesome man of God. He saw the wilderness, and he kept going to the promised land. Well, the whole story in Joshua 4:19 through 24 is about the stones. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask for their fathers, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until he'd crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. What were the stones about? Memories. The stones were put there as a memorial so that generations and generations, and even today, we'd be talking about it. It was a memory that created a foundation for now and the future. People are looking for empowerment. People are not finding empowerment in their jobs, in their money. People are not finding empowerment in politics. The world is not empowering them. People are looking for foundation. They're looking for the stones, the memories that can take them back to God and keep them in the promised land, the foundations. Steve Gooch, we need your prayer book. Steve records every answered prayer. It is an amazing book he showed us about a year ago. I wish I'd done it. Every answered prayer, his foundation. We need that. What are our foundations? What is Cornerstone's cornerstones? If you look back on the webpage, you will see the foundation of Cornerstone. In the first study, you'll see what we believe and what we base our faith on. Our faith is that we love the Lord your God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That Jesus is the chief cornerstone. That we hold to the teachings and we are truly his disciples. John 8. That we will deny ourselves and pick up our cross daily. That we'll love one another as Jesus has loved me. That we'll be fishers of men and follow Jesus. That we will love our God more than our mothers, fathers, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and yes, even our own life. To go make disciples of all nations. That's our cornerstones. But as you look at your foundations, what is your foundations? I brought you back from Colorado a rock. I smuggled it in to Atlanta. And on this rock I put my name. And I put my foundations. My foundations are to love the Lord my God with all my heart. That Jesus is my Lord. That my wife Cindy and my family. My foundation is being thankful every day. I just want God to know I'm thankful. My friendships are my rocks, my foundation. My integrity, my honesty, my humility. The Albert family is a hard-working family. That's a foundation. And that I'll persevere and I will not quit. That's my foundations, my 12. And on the back of my rock, I put my covenant to God. I will be less, God, so they can become more. I will be less so you can become more. We have passed out here in the church rocks for everyone. And Byron's going to sing a couple songs. And what I'm going to ask you to do, you're not going to be able to come up with 12 foundations. I would encourage you this week, what are your 12 foundations? But on your rock, go ahead and write down, what is your foundations? One or two. And then on the back, what is my covenant before God today? What are your foundations today? I commit to you before God that I will become less so you can become more. So I'm going to ask if you're here to write your foundation on your block and put your covenant before God. I'm going to set my stone right here. For some of you, you will want to write down, and you may want to shout it out. Byron knows that some of you may be shouting out as they're singing. We're going to sing 2 songs. Some of you may not want to shout out. That ain't your thing. I get it. No, you don't have to. It's up to you. This is your worship. Put your foundation on one side. Put your covenant on another side. Walk it up here and put it there. Let's make a memorial before God. I'm not comfortable in walking out. I've already asked the ushers, if you're not comfortable in walking, just hold your block up and put it there. What is your foundation? What are the memory stones for you today as we build this before God? And what is your covenant? There'll be 2 songs.